Well, hey there, sober ladies. Thank you so much for joining me today for the Confident Sober Women podcast. I am so excited to be sharing my time today with my friend, Dr. Katie Nall. She is an author, a speaker, and a trainer. And not only does our next generation have, sorry. We're going to restart that. Well, hey there, sober ladies. Thank you so much for joining me today for the Confident Sober Women podcast. I am so excited today to be sharing my time with my friend, Dr. Katie Nall. She's an author, a speaker, and a trainer. And she has her PhD in mathematics education. And she is also a 2-time TEDx speaker, which is pretty awesome. She's a professional member of the National Speakers Association and an accredited trainer. She also is an EFT, or emotional freedom technique, therapist, and is focusing on trauma, quantum, and picture EFT. I love it. I love EFT. It is an incredible modality and it works wonders, especially in the midst of situations. Whether you're in person or online, Dr. Nall shows others how to dissolve their waffles, their worries, anxiety, fear, frustration, lethargy, exhaustion, and stress. A careless housekeeper and worse cook with no desire for rehabilitation, she somehow is still married to the same person for over 49 years. Wow. I'm going to turn the mic over to her and let her share a little bit more about her story, and then we're going to chat.
Oh, Shelby, thank you so much. First of all, I have to tell you, I am so impressed with your podcast and the outreach and your mission. It's very, very valuable and very much needed. So I just want to say kudos to you. So in my childhood, I was being raised by a single mom back when there were no other single moms. And alcohol was very much a part of her life. One of the first things I learned growing up was make me a highball. I didn't meet my dad until I was 14 years old. He also was a very heavy drinker. Both of them ended up dying young. And the physicians had said that alcohol and smoking were primary reasons. My sister at age 42 kind of unconsciously committed suicide by drinking lots and lots of vodka until her liver gave out. So I'm very familiar with alcoholism to the point that I have decided to drink very, very little, if any. So I've seen the effects of it firsthand, and I applaud what you're doing. As a mathematician, I wanted to help students overcome their fear and anxiety about test taking. I was a late in life student, going back to school in my mid-50s to earn my PhD in mathematics education. In doing that, I wanted to help all these students. I was working at a college at the time, Shelby, and there were so many students that were coming up to me and saying, I only have one class left to finish. Well, I was an administrator at the time registering students, and I said, that's great, let's get you registered. They couldn't even say the word math without shaking, without their hands getting all wet and tingly. I thought some of them might vomit in my trash can. And I'm like, oh my gosh, where are you registering? You can't even say the word. So part of my dissertation research was looking for ways to help students overcome their fear and anxiety about math and test taking. I searched and searched and searched, and Shelby, I found nothing. However, I recognized my question as, how do you help students overcome math and test anxiety? And as a word problem, took out just the parts that were relevant, which is what you do in math. And that is, how do you help people overcome anxiety? That was in 2010. And I watched all 10 days of Nick Orntner's 10-day summit. He does it every February. I encourage everyone to listen to it. It was fabulous. Watched all 10 days, bought the book, bought the DVD, had no idea if it was going to work or not, because they mentioned finances, they mentioned relationships, they mentioned addictions. Nobody mentioned anything about math or test taking. Was it going to work or not? But I had a room full of desperate clients. And we all know that desperate clients are the very best because they'll try anything, right? So I took them in one by one and I said, hey, let's try this. I have no idea if it's going to work or not. And after a few weeks, they came back and they said, you know what? I'm not really sure, but I think I'm passing my math class. I had no idea who was more surprised, them or me, because we didn't know if it was going to work. And in the process of doing this, that's how I came about to do my TEDx talk. And it has led to more research on how to help people overcome fear and anxiety, some of which is the root cause of addictions like alcoholism and drugs. So that has been part of my journey.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And I'm sorry to hear about your sister. That's a horrible thing to experience, but you understand and have lived through the direct effects of this disease, and that makes you a qualified member to talk about it, right? And for those of you who are having that sickness in your stomach at the word math and think that we're going to be talking about that, I don't think that's where we're going. I am definitely a person that doesn't math, but the reason why we think this is so relevant is for exactly what you started talking about, which was the anxiety. And I know from my work as a therapist as well that trauma is the number one indicator for addictions. That is what we're seeing in the research now. That is what the 40 years of research on the ACEs studies have shown us, that over and over again, young people and all the way up into adulthood who are struggling with specific factors related to environmental, financial, familial, whatever, stressors, employment, sexual trauma, physical trauma, all of these things lead to wanting to numb out or escape your life. And people do that in a variety of ways, right? So they can do it through drugs and alcohol. It could be shopping. It could be men. It could be, workaholism. There's a lot of things that fall under that addiction category, right? My specialty happens to be drugs and alcohol. That's what I know the best. However, I have seen in my private practice this show up very much for a lot of us as secondary addictions. Mostly, I think for women, it looks like food, or men. But anxiety in my story for sure is definitely the underlying thread that I didn't identify until much later, because when we were younger, nobody really talked about it that way. I talk about it in my memoir. I wrote a memoir this past year called Recovering in Recovery, the Life-Changing Joy of Sobriety. And I share in that early part of my story how I felt like I lived in constant chaos. And what I identify now is that that was anxiety. We just didn't call it that back then, right? So I love that this conversation is going to be centered around these things. And your acronym is super cool too, because it helps us to remember things. So as you were starting to study this and work with your clients, and again, we're going to be using her research on math, as that's going to come up sometimes. Okay, guys. So when you hear the word math, don't freak out. Just substitute other things, or just block it out or whatever. But let's just focus on the issue at hand, which is the underlying anxiety from whatever issue that is. So as you were uncovering your own research on this and starting to really kind of pare down on it, what did you discover was some of the reasons for the anxiety?
I agree with you, Shelby. You're right. My research has confirmed all the things that you're saying. The ACEs study, those 10 questions that can really trigger that what happens in our early years of childhood can make such a difference. Subsequent research I'm doing, I'm actually going into what would be considered non-traditional areas and looking at things like past life regression and seeing how that may be affecting. And people can say that they had past lives or not, but they may have memories in their DNA. As a scientist, I really struggled with that until someone reminded me that when my grandmother was pregnant with my mother, that my mother had her eggs developed in her. So everything that my grandmother experienced during her pregnancy was imprinted in my DNA. When my mother was born, everything my mother, all the emotions she felt until I was born were imprinted in my DNA. So that when the day I was born, I already had imprints from who knows how many generations. Today, the trendy topic is intergenerational trauma, right? But that intergenerational trauma is another factor as well. And so I frequently look at it as a three-prong approach: body, mind, and spirit. It's led me to become a Qigong instructor because that's a very easy to do exercise to move the body around, to do the tapping for the mind, and then moving into some of the intergenerational trauma release through things like past life regression.
Mm. Yeah, the intergenerational trauma is definitely a buzzword right now. And I think it's because we just don't know enough yet. Like we know what we see. We see these systemic issues that are just seem to be unfixable, right? Like generational poverty, generational abuse, addiction over and over and over again. And so, yeah, it makes sense that the research is being pointed in that direction because we'd like to figure it out. Because when you can become the spoke in the wheel, right? When it's a teacher or a therapist or a researcher or a coach or somebody, usually a person, sometimes an institution, can come in to that person's life and be the spoke in the wheel to stop the generational trauma, that's when we get a break in the system, right? That's
Right.
when we can start getting that. But, these systems are long standing and very difficult to work with. And we can all do our part, right? We can just hope that with more time that we'll be able to reach more educators, reach more trainers, reach more people, adults that are working with young people in particular, so that they can be taught a lot of this and get the help they need earlier on, and then subsequently affect, their children and so on and so on.
I agree with you, Shelby. And I think you touched on a really key point is that it's frequently that one person who shows that they care. I read these studies over and over again, and it was that one person, whether it was an aunt, a grandparent, a teacher, a police officer, somebody who made another person feel seen, heard, and loved. And that's really what can make the difference. So you're right, sharing that information with others can make all the difference in the world.
Yeah, it really can. And I think sometimes people don't realize the impact they have. Sometimes we think that we make ourselves small. We think, oh gosh, what am I really doing?
Right.
But sometimes it is just that mentorship. It's like the things that you're doing. It's just sometimes it's just showing up. It's just being a seat in a chair in somebody's space, right? So that they know there are other people like them and they're not alone.
Right.
Um, it's important, and you just don't know. I mean, I have 3 teenagers in my home, so it's interesting to me a lot of the times when I look at, yeah, don't be jealous, right? Um, uh, when I see the kids that come around, that we've interacted with in the past and now, and I get to affect their lives in some way, positive or negative, right? I mean,
Mhm.
we're welcoming them in my home. When I speak to them, when I send them a quick message, like yesterday, I sent one to one of our dear friends from my oldest middle school years. They're not really friends anymore. They're not friends. They just fell away, and she's graduated too. I just sent her a message and said, "I'm so proud of you, and I can't believe all the cool things you're doing, and good for you." And she just sent back a really wonderful thank you message. I mean, I don't know if that's going to be a thing, but it felt good. It certainly isn't harmful, I don't think. So
Right.
we don't know what we're going to do that's going to affect another person.
Yeah.
So as
Yeah.
we start to get into this anxiety piece, I really just want to hear from your perspective, because what I see so often is, like, my own experience is that constant chaos, right? I think for me, some of it, and I don't like to spend a lot of time on like what should have been or could have been, or, my parents didn't do this or I missed it. I can speculate on, I probably had untreated ADHD, wasn't talked about then. I've had some other underlying abandonment issues from my parents' divorce. That was the root of all of my trauma. And that manifested itself in the way that it did for me. And so what it showed up for me though was a lot of that I'm not good enough, smart enough, pretty enough, thin enough, all of that stuff, which then manifested into the I need to be different. How do I numb out? And that's what led to my really falling in love with substances, because it took away those feelings. What I see from a lot of my clients is similar things, but then also some really just debilitating responses.
Mm.
I feel like are getting increasingly more challenging that I'm seeing. People who can't leave their homes, people who have fear of driving, people um, who don't get into relationships, people who hold themselves back from pursuing certain things because of the fear of failure, or just they're
Mhm.
too anxious to speak to people, or to like apply for the school or any of that stuff. And it really is, it has a grip.
Mhm.
It has a strong grip. Is that what you kind of saw with your students as you were starting to get to know them?
Well, because I work with a population outside of students as well, I agree with you. I think that we've been hit with a triple threat: the pandemic, which led everyone home; social media, which isolated people; and so many fears. The partitioning that we're seeing of people having to almost choose sides in almost every category, right? And all of those things combining are making people more, their emotions are more intense and more deep
Mhm.
about their waffles, right? That they are feeling stronger emotions than they did before because they're getting hit on so many different sides. And it's a very isolating thing between the pandemic and the social media and having to choose a side, whether you do or not, right? So many of my friends have said, oh, well, I'm not going to be friends with that person because of such and such. And some of them are lifelong friends, some of them are family members. So there really is a sense of isolation that is coming about. And just as we had said earlier, what brings us forward? And it's that one person that tells us from time to time that you are important, you have been seen, you have been heard. And if we're not getting that from someone we care about, we love, we respect, that really drives us into ourselves and brings us into our waffles that then we're challenged to dissolve.
Yeah, it really does. And you're right about the isolation and the loneliness that
Yeah.
causes. I mean, we get sucked into that swirl of like, I'm the only person that's going through this. And even if that's not true, and your frontal lobe is saying that's not true, when you're stuck in anxiety, we're in that back part, right? In that
Mhm.
hippocampus, that reptilian area that's not rational. It's completely hijacking your brain. This is the
Mhm.
piece that I don't think people, maybe you can speak to it from your own research. I don't think people understand this at all. I do EMDR therapy, so I've studied this a lot, but like, our frontal lobe is where all the cognitive and thinking and rational thought happens, but it literally goes offline. That's like the analogy I use. Like your computer is offline
Right.
and that back part takes over, but it's hard to like communicate that to somebody like when you're in the middle of that
Mhm.
situation.
Mhm.
And so how do you recommend, or how do you do it in your work? How do you do that?
So I explain to people, as you well know, Shelby, that if I told you behind that closed door over there that there was a tiger ready to jump out and you believed it, your body would react whether it was true or not.
Right.
And so it's our body reacts based on what we believe, not what we know, our prefrontal cortex, but what we believe. And our belief is based on our life experiences. So if they trust me and they believe me, then their body's going to react. So that's why I like tapping and EMDR,
Mhm.
because the somatic method kind of relieves that. Well, it doesn't kind of, but definitely relieves that, so that you can have the prefrontal cortex come back online and take charge again and reassure the amygdala and the hippocampus that, hey, it's okay. I now have skills that I didn't have when you guys were first alerted that you needed to be careful about this. And that, so focusing in on the body and where do you feel that in the body has helped
Mhm.
so much, so
Yeah, I
much.
completely agree with that. I actually share that same sentiment with my clients. And so when I work with them, because I always say that our brains only believe what we tell it. It will believe what we tell it. And I think that's foreign to people. They don't understand this is foreign, right? So yeah, if you're telling yourself, I'm not safe, I'm not safe, I'm not safe. I mean, even though that may or may not be true, like if you're in a situation and you're like walking down the street and there's nobody around you and you're completely safe, but you're in your mind saying I'm not safe, you got to get away. There's someone, your brain only can believe what you're telling it. And so now suddenly, yes, you are not safe.
Yeah.
because that's what your brain believes, and your body is going to get into that fight or flight pretty immediately and take you down a path that's going to be destructive. Now, some people kind of live in that state, I feel like,
Yes, I
regularly.
just finished reading Kander's Invisible Storm, and him coming back from his tour in Afghanistan, where he was really trained to be um, on alert 24/7. Now he came back, he was safe. He really never had any incident. It was always the threat of having something. So his body was always primed, and he was doing great things. He ran for lots of different elections statewide. He was a potential presidential candidate and was going off, but because his body believed he was not safe, regardless of how many people he had around him, his body behaved like that and was almost shutting down to the point where, it was becoming potentially dangerous. And what's interesting, Shelby, and I know you see this in your practice as well, it wasn't affecting just him, but all of his idiosyncrasies that he had to do to feel safe, even when he couldn't feel safe, was affecting his family.
Yeah.
So that secondary PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, was happening to his family members as well, to his wife and his young son, so that it doesn't, that feeling of waffles that we get isn't singular. Is kind of like what we used to say about cigarette smoke. Just because you smoke doesn't mean that everybody in the house isn't getting it. The same thing is true with waffles, is that
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, you see it if you're even in a relationship with you can see it in your own marriage or your own
right,
family. Like, everybody has a thing, right? And maybe if somebody's like a yeller, or if there's anxiety in the family, and like, so now plans are made in a specific kind of way, or we don't do this because of this, and then everybody kind of falls in line, and like, then they're making sacrifices based on maybe things they might want or desire because of the other person's fear, right?
yeah, we've heard
Changes.
that phrase, walking on eggshells, right?
Yeah. Makes me think of the young people, like the children who are living in homes where there's violence, right? And so they're probably similar to this man. They have heightened senses of
Yeah,
feeling of not being safe, and they're always going to be on alert. So to work with them to be able to tone that down a notch as adults, I mean, no wonder people turn to substances to turn
right,
it off, right?
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
and the research shows that even if the child is not abused, having them watch abuse creates the exact same pathways, neural pathways in their brain as if they had been abused.
Hmm.
So that's why, there's a lot of tall people who masquerade as adults. And they really haven't been trained. And that's what I say. They haven't been trained in how to manage and control their own emotions so that they can be effective parents. And that's what I look forward to helping, is to help these people who just haven't been trained on how to stand up for themselves, on how to set boundaries, on how to not have to walk on eggshells. Yeah.
And so how do you do that? I mean, I know it's a loaded question. You just mentioned boundaries too. That's one of my favorite topics as well, because it's such a critical component to a lot of this. But in a nutshell, like, what are some of the key points in your coaching or your program design, right? Like, what are the steps, I guess I would say, that you lead people through in order to begin to learn how to control their emotions?
So Shelby, I find, as I know you probably do too, that most clients already know the answers.
Mm.
And so it's just giving them the freedom to say them. And I have found that tapping is the way that the most effective, the quickest way that I have found for people to be able to define and set their own boundaries and then make decisions based on those boundaries. Because sometimes all their decisions are based on, oh, I'm not complete unless, right? We were just talking about that. I'm not enough. I'm not unless.
Ah.
And then having people recognize that, no, you're fabulous just as you are. And tapping can do that, can bring that about. Now, I've recently, as I said, have added past life regression to it for intergenerational trauma. I had a client come in last week who was feeling very overwhelmed. We worked with picture tapping, and she made huge progress. She asked to come back a second time because she was feeling like there was something else. And after we did the intergenerational trauma work, she left and she is flying high now. It was like, it was the difference was between night and day. I was absolutely astounded. There are so many techniques that are out there for clients that when they're ready for them and they're open for them, that can change their lives, not just their lives, but the lives of those around them. Just like we were talking about the secondary PTSD and secondary wafflettes, should we call them?
Sub waffles. Yeah.
Sub-waffles.
Yeah, I love that. Wafflettes. I love it. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that success story. It's always wonderful when we get those. They keep us going, right? They keep us in those. So when the moments come when we're like, oh, feeling so much despair, like, am I even helping? We can really turn to them and remind ourselves, yes, we are doing a good job. And that you're right. I believe everybody has within them the power to do their own healing. We all have the tools that we need, but we don't always know how to use them. And we need a guide, we need somebody to pull them out and someone to point them out. And also most people just really want to be heard and validated, they really just do. And so often in life, we're getting that, we're not getting that.
Yeah.
You mentioned about the pandemic. I feel like that was a big part of that too. Like you started to create a lot of isolation. We'll talk about anxiety and fear. And for people who might already have been prone to that, I mean, now we've just triple X'd it, right? And maybe it was valid for certain, maybe not so much for others. And it's personal, but it certainly has created a society of more fear, right? More than we need.
Yes, I agree.
What is picture tapping? I'm curious about. First of all, let's just back up because a lot of people might not be familiar with EFT. I know you and I are, and we're talking in this language and these acronyms that people are probably like, what is going on? So can you just explain to the audience what EFT or tapping is and like why you use it and all the good stuff?
Thank you, Shelby. Tapping is also called emotional freedom technique, or EFT. It was developed by electrical engineer Gary Craig. He was trained at Stanford University. He was observing psychologists and psychiatrists who had ventured into traditional Chinese medicine, looking for faster solutions for clients that they felt like they couldn't help. He saw traditional Chinese medicine's meridians, which are 12 major energy systems that flow through the body. And he saw them as electrical circuits. And he said, you know what? If we tap on 8 points of the body, we're going to hit the intersection of most of those circuits. And because he understood electronics, he's like, these circuits will be, activated. And in activating them, through this somatic method, which you basically tap on yourself on these points, you are going to be helping to clear the energy, or as they would call it, qi, in your body, and with the intention of being able to clear up issues. So that's a very general description of tapping. To become certified in tapping, you take level 1 and level 2 and do case studies. To go into advanced level 3, there's additional classes, additional tests, and additional case studies. To become a supervisor and a mentor, of course, there's additional classes and case studies. There's also trauma tapping, which is working with people like PTSD, additional research. Picture tapping is very interesting. Every other tapping modality that we use, we ask the client, what was the one thing that you were doing at that one time? So if somebody came in, I'll use well, I have a tendency to use math as examples because it's very concrete. And people will come in and say, when I take a test, and the last time I took a test was last Monday afternoon. So we tap just on how they feel about taking a test on that last Monday afternoon. I had client after client that was like, no, you don't understand. I have this overwhelming sense of overwhelm, and it has been going on all my life. Well, we can't talk about any one time. So picture tapping allows us to go into very general issues. And we start off by writing out what the issue is, for instance, overwhelm, and then give them a blank piece of paper, an array of colored markers, and say, let your emotions draw anything on this piece of paper. You can draw anything. Some people draw straight lines, some people draw shapes, some people draw elaborate pictures, and then we tap just on the pictures. We don't tap on the emotion, we don't tap anything else. So in this picture, I have a green square in the upper right-hand corner. And so it kind of gives them that separation between that feeling of overwhelm and their emotions. I have had huge success with this, with people who are coming in saying, I'm overwhelmed, especially in today's world, and I don't know why. Okay, well, just draw anything, just anything. And then we tap on the actual picture. We use a lot of what is called clean language, where we don't, of course, it's a very safe area, emotionally safe area for them to be in. And we focus on just their drawing. When they're finished, they draw a series of pictures until they get to where we feel like it's been resolved. Then we do an exercise after that. And then we go back through the very beginning, and they are surprised that as we look at the pictures they've drawn now, that there's no emotion attached to it. It's a very effective and fun. It's a real fun way, and it's really good with children, right? Because they love to draw. And adults are like, oh, I can't draw this right. I'm like, nobody else is going to see it. Just draw anything.
So you ask them to draw their emotions is basically what you're saying. Like, and maybe they might scribble across the page or like.
Right, and that's fine.
Yeah.
And then we tap on the scribble. We don't tap on their emotions. We don't tap on it. So we just say, in this purple scribble. And so we just tap about the purple scribble, and where, yeah, it's a crazy thing. Yeah, it's very powerful.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that so much. I'm thinking already, like, I wonder if I can use my tappers and bilateral stimulation and do the same exact thing. That might be a cool way to use it for people who are like super overwhelmed and like maybe not even ready. Like we can't even go into like a thing yet.
No, right. Yeah, it's a great way to start. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah, the person who does the training is in the UK, and so we do the training. You submit case studies to be a certified picture tapper. Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah.
So I'm so glad that you're seeing a lot of success with that. And what's cool about tapping is that I like, and maybe this is something that you kind of advertise too, like it's personal. You can do it anywhere. I mean, obviously you can come to a practitioner and do EFT sessions, right? But you can also do this at home. You can do it at work. You can do it in your car. You can step into the bathroom. I mean, you can privately take care of yourself when you're in the midst of a situation and nobody really, I mean, people are going to see you tapping. So, but like if you step out of the room, you can do it in literally like 5 to 7 minutes. I mean, or less. Like that's the coolest thing about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. It's self-administered. It's non-addictive, non-invasive, and self-administered. And that's one of the biggest problems I have, Shelby, is that my clients are so successful and now they know the techniques. So I'm always searching for new waffles.
That's great. That's a good problem to have, right? My clients are so successful, they never come back.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's so cool. So when you're teaching people to tap, what are some of the biggest objections that you get?
Great question, Shelby. The number one objection I get, and I expect this because I got this when I tried this on my first volunteer, Bob, my husband. I said, sit down and we're going to tap on all the negative emotions you're feeling. And he turned to me and said, for 40 years, you've been telling me to be positive, and now you want me to be negative? I said, yeah, that positive stuff wasn't working. The number one issue is people don't want to admit the negative feelings. I said, that's okay. You don't have to admit it. They're still in your body. And until we release the negative emotions, we don't have room to put the positive in. That is the number one issue. People, in fact, I've had people refuse to work with me because they said, I don't have any negative emotions. I said, okay, that's fine. But that's how tapping works, is that it releases that negative emotions, most of which we don't want to say out loud.
Well, there's a lot of shame around that, right? I mean,
Right?
we live in a world where, especially lately in the last several years or generation or so, we get into this like toxic positivity, right? Where, you know, the Instagram plaques are like, grow where you're planted, and, you know, and positive affirmations and all these things. And I mean, all of those things are good. These are not bad things.
No.
But I think it's unrealistic to just throw a positivity band-aid on somebody's anxiety or somebody's bad day or overwhelm and expect that it's really going to solve their problem. I mean,
Right.
you know, and especially if it's more chronic, you know, I mean, we all have moments like maybe I'm mostly a positive person. I have a lot of energy usually. And then, I mean, there's times when I just get really down or I get, you know, frustrated. Like I said, I have these kids in my house. There's always something, you know, we go through periods. We were just having one like, oh, everything is like relatively good. I hate to ever say that out loud. You know, like we're kind of cruising through the summer. We're getting ready to take my daughter to college. Everything's kind of going along. And then my youngest son, starting high school, this is a luxury problem. I'm well aware. He came and said, I don't think I want to stay. He's a swimmer and a competitive swimmer, and he also plays lacrosse, and he's ready to make a change with his team, right? Which I knew was probably coming someday. He's ready to up level his experience. Okay, well, that's doesn't sound like a big deal, but like now I have to go find a new team. There are 3 or 4 in the area. I have to contact them. They're not in our area. They're 30 minutes away. You have to schedule the time. You know, it's a lot of management, you
Yeah.
know? And if I'm in a good space, I can be like, you know what? Okay, I got this. But if I have 2 or 3 of those things happening, now suddenly I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get these things done? And I don't want to let my son down, and I can't ask my husband for help because he's busy, and la 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 la, you know, all the things.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know. We had 3 kids within 5 years, so I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. It can be overwhelming.
I forgot where I was going with that.
I
Like,
should
the
offer a
question.
picture tapping session for you.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, so I guess my point is, you know, everything can be kind of cruising along. And then we all have those moments where it's like, oh, this is overwhelming. Even if for the most positive person, that was my point. Right.
Sure.
And so, but this toxic positivity movement we seem to be kind of stuck in is very, I think, hurtful to a lot of people, because then it just leads them to more shame and guilt about their own experience of anxiety or stress or frustration about their own waffles. Right. So now they're suddenly like, well, there's something wrong with me, obviously, because I can't get to the positive. Is
Right.
that part of the experience you have?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And they have this false sense of positivity, and you can kind of feel it, Shelby. You know, you can kind of feel that vibe about they're trying so hard to be positive, but you can kind of like, it doesn't feel authentic, right? It doesn't feel vibrant. It's kind of like a dead positivity, I guess. Terrible way to say that.
Yeah, I think it's just fake. It's probably
Yeah.
the easiest way to say it, because, and I do think that some of us are just more glass half full people, you know, in general, and some of us tend to be a little bit more, maybe a little bit more. My husband calls it realism. I call him pessimistic, but he's like, I'm a realist, right? Some people are more realist, you know, and they just tend to look at things a little bit differently. And there's nothing wrong with any of those ways. It's just that if you start piling on a few things, you get that body activity, and then, you know, it's hard to get out of it by yourself.
Yeah, I get it. I totally get that and agree. Yeah.
I read this great book called Dare, Dare. I can't remember the author. Did you read it?
No, I bet it sounds really familiar. And if I didn't read it, I think I may have reviewed it.
He was excellent. I liked him a lot because he kind of spoke the same language I do. I'm a big like personal responsibility
Yeah,
fan
me too.
as well, and I think that that's a lost art in our society. People don't really want to do that anymore, and they're
Mm-mm.
not encouraged to in certain circles. So I liked him a lot because he basically spends, I'm simplifying this obviously, a lot of time acknowledging the thing. Let's acknowledge the fact that, yeah, you're having anxiety right now. And his is a lot of like, you're having the anxiety and you do it anyway type of work. So you're like walking through the grocery store and yeah, your body is responding, but you're learning to talk to yourself and say, yeah, I feel you. I feel you coming in. But I'm here in the grocery store and I'm going to keep shopping. I'm going to keep pushing my car. Yep. It's just my anxiety talking. And it's really powerful. I really liked the book. I thought it was helpful.
I'm going to go back to it. Thank you for that recommendation. That's
And I
great.
was just thinking like it would be great to then layer in your tapping, right? So then you're in that moment too. And then you're like, oh my gosh, when I get to my car, I'm going to start tapping. Some of the other things that I always promote that I think are really helpful for in the moment stuff is movement, any kind of physical
Right.
activity. I always encourage people to I have a little course. It's like a mini course called 5 Ways to Take Control of Your Anxiety in the Moment. And this is one of the ways. Like you could run up and down your steps for 30 seconds, kind of jog in place, do jumping jacks for like little bursts of 30 to 45 seconds, and then take a breath, kind of check in, how's my anxiety level, better, same or worse, and then go back into it and do a couple rounds of that, because we can burn off that excess energy that the anxiety creates. And also it's difficult for your brain to be doing two things at the same time like that.
Yeah. So you're trying to move your body from a sympathetic to a parasympathetic status so that it can relax a little bit and not be in that heightened state of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So yeah.
What have you done with tapping in your experience and in your practice for cravings?
So very interesting. Always go back to the childhood. Think about the cravings, right? And we tap on it and work to get to a certain level. But then I ask them to imagine, let's say chocolate, it's a very popular one, right in front of them. And imagine you're 6 years old, okay? And I'm going to take your chocolate away from you. What just happened? And usually a memory comes up of I always had to share with my sibling, or my older brother would take it away from me, or I wasn't ever allowed to have it unless I snuck it around. And so we could very quickly get to that limiting belief and tap on that limiting belief to just like knock it out. But that's a great little way to get to that, to have them imagine, okay, what age are you and what's going on? And just like it just comes out immediately, right?
Yeah, that's helpful because so many people, like I mentioned, especially like people in recovery, have these secondary addictions, right? So it might be food or men or shopping or gambling or just whatever impulse control issues. And so it's sometimes it's difficult. I know I can speak for myself, right? So if I'm in a stage where I just want to do what I want to do, it's difficult for me to catch myself in that. Like I know all the tools, I have a whole huge toolbox. It's pretty cool. But it depends on my mental health at that particular moment, whether or not I want to use them or not. I make an active decision to turn my back on all of it or step into it. Right. And so if I'm going to step into it, then I can quickly be like, you know what, I'm going to do exactly what you just said. But we have to be able to be responsible though. And that's the challenging part.
I know. I hate that part. Don't you?
Oh, every day.
It's good for somebody else, but not for me.
1,000,000%. Like I almost wish we had I had like a dog collar, like a shock collar, and somebody was like, like, oh, you're having that thought, like, oh, or oh, you're standing in front of the refrigerator. Nope.
Yeah. Yeah. I get it totally.
Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't work.
And actually, it gives me an opportunity. I frequently bring in the quantum tapping. And the quantum tapping is the past life stuff. And what's interesting is when I do it, all the information comes to the client, not to me. And so they start telling the story, and then they start remembering about, whatever story there was. I had a chiropractor at one. Do you mind if I tell you a story about?
Sure.
So I had a chiropractor who came into my office one time, and she's given me permission to share this story, where she was holding her back, which I thought was very strange for a chiropractor who is in a practice with other chiropractors. And I thought she could get an adjustment, but didn't say anything. She wanted to talk to me because she was behind in completing patient reports. And if she didn't complete her patient report, the firm didn't get paid. She had over 100 patient reports she was behind in. So the group said, you have got to get something going on. So she came to me to help focus on writing reports. Okay, so we're going to work on that. Well, we came up with a 5th grade teacher who used to make fun of her writing, but we couldn't get any further on the subjective units of distress. That's a way a person measures how intense that emotion feels. And it goes from 0 to 10. She couldn't get lower than a 5. I didn't know what to do. So I just asked her, I said, hey, what's going on with your back? She said, I'm not really sure. I've got the sharp pain. It's been here for a while and it's not going anywhere. We've been working on it for months. I said, what the heck? Let's just start tapping on your back. Well, I started introducing some of the quantum language in there, which she was open to. And she said, I got it. I said, what is it? I remember being a Roman soldier on the battlefield and somebody came behind me, stabbed me in my back and killed me. I said, well, let's tap on that. And she's like, okay. So we tapped on that, cleared it, went back to, about writing those 100 reports. That went all the way to 0. Well, I was flabbergasted because that was the first time I'd actually used those kind of training. Called her a week later just to check in and see how she was doing and how the reports were going. She said, they're going great. I got them all done. I said, wait a minute, you got 100 reports done in 1 week? She said, yeah, I feel great. I got them all done. That was over 5 years ago. And she is still staying current with her reports. No more pain in her back.
That's amazing. It's so true. Yeah, it's crazy, but it's also not crazy because this stuff gets stored in our body. Like you said, it's at the cellular level. And like, we only have very few years of like research or data to understand what truly is going on with the body. When you look at the age of our own country, honestly, I mean, it's just very minute in comparison to the entire universe, right? So we're just going to learn more and more and more. Your expertise is so incredibly valuable to the world. I'm so glad that you're doing this work, that you're sharing it here. How can people find out more about tapping in general? Like if they wanted to.
Well, they can watch my TEDx talk. My first TEDx talk is all about using tapping with math, but it's very general in nature. I'm on all social media as Katie Nall, PhD. That's spelled K-A-T-I-E, N is in November, A-L-L, PhD. And then go to my website, which is my last name, Nall, N-A-L-L, followed by the word edge, E-D-G-E-C-O.com. That becomes knowledgecompany.com.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I'll make sure I link to those below in the show notes for sure. I know you referenced the Ornsteins, and I know they're the kind of gurus for the beginning of tapping. I always used to go to the tappingsolution.com. I don't know if you recommend that or.
Yeah, it's great.
And
there's tons of stuff on YouTube. Yeah.
Yes. The tappingsolution.com was really helpful to me. That was where I started spending a lot of time way back when I started learning about it, and they were helpful. And the modalities have certainly increased, and the ways we're using it now have really increased, which is so cool. And they have a podcast too.
They do have a podcast, and I'm also certified to do training. I actually have trainings coming up usually about once a month, 8-hour training to become level 1, so that you will have the ability to tap on yourself, your family, and your friends. And if you want to go on to become certified, I offer level 2 later on.
Do you offer CEUs for that?
Yes, depending on the group that needs CEUs. I have them for attorneys, and I have them for whoever needs them. I have ways to get them. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. Well, this has been a fabulous conversation, super exciting and informative. I know the audience is going to get a lot out of this, and definitely check out our TED Talk, guys. Okay. Or 2 TED Talks, and start to investigate this world of EFT and anxiety. It's going to be life-changing for sure. So thank you so much again for your time. I look forward to our paths crossing again. And I hope you have a fantastic day.
Thank you so much, Shelby. I appreciate you.
You too.